the agenda as laid out. First of all, the introduction of late items.
I don't have any late items.
No one? There was a previous recommendation that King Edward Bay Water System Local Advisory Committee approve the agenda and the late items agenda, if applicable, for December the 3rd. So there's our recommendation, our proposal. And having made that proposal, presumably we need a seconder for that, do we? And we have a seconder. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And is there any resistance to our acceptance, or can we approve this by assent? It seems there's no objection, so can we just approve that by assent and move on to item 2, which is the adoption of the minutes of the September 11th, 2019 meeting. And again, presumably everyone's had a chance to read those minutes. And I propose that we accept them as written. Do I have a seconder for that? Thanks again, Jonathan. And is there any dissent from that proposal, or can we accept them by assent?
Just a question for clarification. The minutes contain a number of links to attachments of at the time. Do those links stay live for our?
I believe one link died. Only one. That was the RFP, but that was in a notices page.
Okay.
So I just haven't had the time to go, and I'm going to create. Annette and I are going to work on having just a water information page.
Oh, okay.
RFP will appear on that link.
Okay, so the information is archived later on.
Yes. So yeah.
Super.
And Steph, the RFP is available online now if they want to look at it or not.
I think that's been closed. I've noticed after I've sent all the agendas out that it's now been closed. So we will. I've got.
Oh, so you didn't get it posted on the general water page then?
Not yet. Sorry.
Okay.
Presumably it will be.
Yes.
Then that's fine. Several of us had a chance to read it anyway, and we've already discussed it at the open meeting.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there's been no, objection to accepting the previous minutes, and we have one seconder, I'll just approve them by assent, shall we? And move on.
Thank you.
The next item is public comments, so an opportunity for the public to make a contribution to this meeting. Jerry, I think you were first in line. Is there anything you would like to contribute at this stage?
I'm just listening.
No?
Can you hear me?
Oh.
We can hear you, Jerry. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just here representing the Bluewater group today, just to try and coordinate things as closely as we can. So I'm strictly going to observe. I'm not going to interrupt or be involved in your meeting in any way. I'd just like to share with you, and hopefully you'll do the same when we meet next week.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks. So I'll just go back on mute.
Okay. And actually, Glenn, I suppose you're here in two capacities. You've got a vested interest having in your place in Evergreen. So did you have anything you wanted to contribute as a member of the public?
No, I'll stay silent as a member of the public. I'll just represent the project in the municipality.
Okay, that's fair enough. And is there anyone else? I've got a name here that I'm not sure how to pronounce. Cashman is the last name.
Oh, that's Aoife. Sorry, I forgot to introduce her. She is the finance officer of the municipalities. She likes to lurk in the background, and we're doing everything properly.
Hi, everyone. I report into Raj as CFO for the finance team. Hello, sorry. It's not a very glamorous office, so I turned off the camera.
You can go back to lurking then, if that's what you do.
Yeah.
Okay, and Jenny, you're here as an observer of the meeting. Would you have anything to contribute? Do you want to say something at the moment?
Mute. No, I'm just an interested observer.
That's good. All right, more observers the better. Well, thank you very much for that. Then we can move on to Public Works, and this is Patrick who's going to go through the huge amount of work that the municipality has been going on to, and I'll just perhaps pass it over to you.
Okay, sure. Can everybody hear me? I've been having issues with my computer lately.
You're
So
fading.
the main things I wanted to touch on, the Aquifer monitoring program and study that was started earlier this year in April in collaboration with the Arbutus Ridge developer. One of the initial drivers was their proposal to construct phase 2 of Arbutus Bridge and 9 new lots, and the questions around the capacity of the aquifer to support that additional development, as well as the subsequent phases that they're now looking at moving forward with, and all of the rest of the water systems that are that draw water from this source, Bluewater, King Edward Bay, and Bowen Bay water systems, as well as a number of private wells. So we've just received a draft of that aquifer assessment, summary of the monitoring program and an assessment report, and we're just in the process of finalizing that, and we'll be making it available as soon as we can. It does provide a lot of guidance on how we can improve and optimize the use of the aquifer, and it provides some level of confidence in the sustainability of this as a water source for everybody. So we're working on finalizing that. We've also hired Urban Systems, we've got quite a good response to our request for proposals for water system design improvements services, and we've selected Urban Systems, and Glenn's here to help us in some of the discussions we might have. We're underway in the first phase, which is looking at an assessment analysis of options, as well as concept design and cost estimates for the proposed solutions. Really, we're looking at what's the best way to meet the level of service that everybody on municipal water system should have, and it's primarily the Bluewater system users that currently don't have that. And that will involve working with all 3 water systems. We will be arranging community meetings, and we can talk about what exactly that looks like, whether it's a LAC meeting or involves the broader community to review the options and the solutions that we come up with as we proceed with this work. We'll also be working in conjunction with the Arbutus Ridge developer and looking at their next phases, which they're this week or next. We're expecting some proposals from them to look at phase 2 and 3. Phase 3 and 4. Phase 2 is the one that they've just completed. So all of the municipal works have been installed as part of that phase, with the exception of the pump station, which we're expecting in the next couple of months to have that completed. And then development to proceed shortly thereafter on the first 9 lots of that development. So maybe I'll pause there, and if there's any questions or comments around those items, the aquifer study and the water system improvements project, we can address that.
This is Bruce McTaggart. Do you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
A couple questions. I didn't see in the information that was supplied to us, is there a water analysis been done on that well?
There is.
Can we,
If that wasn't supplied, we can make that available on the community page that Steph referred to.
okay.
Yeah. Can I just ask a clarifying question? Bruce, are you referring to the sort of spectrum analysis of what's in the water, which I think would have been in the information meeting with the Aquifer for the coastal health report?
Yeah, that was my next question is, I wasn't at the previous meeting, so I wasn't sure if there was a construction permit that's been submitted to Vancouver Coastal Health and if that's public accessible.
Their construction permit, I believe there is, and I don't see why that wouldn't be accessible.
Would that be on the community webpage to look at, or how would I be able to, or do I contact Michael Wu, or?
I think we'll make all of that information available.
Okay.
Community page. There right now the well licensing is underway. That's being done by consultant EXP, Matthew Munn, on behalf of the developer and the municipality. So the well is in process of being registered with the province as a municipal well.
Don, have you got something to add to that?
I had a question on a different topic, so is that in order?
Bruce, have you completed your questions, or did you want something to say something?
Well, I think the construction permit will probably answer a lot of my questions when I review that, so I'm good at the moment.
Thanks, Bruce. Don, what have you got?
Okay, Patrick, based on that report then for the Arbutus Ridge, can you tell the committee what you think is the capacity of the two active wells in the King Edward Bay system? How much can they pump out that is safe?
Hang on here. So we have, and this is from the draft of the EXP Aquifer study, which will be soon made available. There's the two King Edward Bay wells. There's the well that's used most, which is actually not the better of the two, which has a 3.5 US gallon per minute as the estimate of the sustainable yield. That's well TW01. The sustainable yield of well 497 is estimated to be 7.3 US gallons per minute. So there's a capacity to draw more water from that well than we currently are. The estimated sustainable yield of the new well that's been installed as part of the phase 2 King Edward Arbutus Ridge development is 15.2 gallons per minute. And this is newer information, but earlier today I was discussing with Ian Stewart, who has the adjacent property that's in the process of subdividing to 4 lots, about possibly bringing one of the wells on his property into the municipal system, and that's about a 14 gallon per minute well. Generally, the wells, so the new well, Arbutus 2 well and the Stewart well are both very good wells. And generally the Bowen Bay wells are also much higher producing. There's one 23 gallon per minute well in the Bowen Bay system. And the Bluewater wells are much less so, which is part of the problem.
Okay, so in terms of the current wells in our infrastructure, they're just the two. The others are not online yet. Now that's in US gallons, whereas a lot of our reports have been in either metric or imperial. But in my calculation, basically, when it comes to at least our billing structure, we tend to, I won't say guarantee, but we tend to promise that each connection can have 288 US gallons per day. So doing the math then, basically, it seems to me like in terms of what we can support at that level, which would be the one at which penalties kick in, but we can support at that level about 5 connections per US gallon per minute from the well. Is that an appropriate calculus?
Yeah, it sounds okay.
Okay, that's an appropriate way at least to approach it, though. That is what I was looking at is how many houses can we support given a certain gallons per minute coming from the wells?
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to work out that calculation given what we currently have connected at King Order Bay and what we're looking at for Arbutus Ridge. So we've been advised that our committee is basically a strategic one. So thinking of strategies, I'm just wondering if that's a useful heuristic or rule of thumb to look at in terms of how many homes we can support.
Well, maybe I can jump in on that.
Don, it's Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
If I could, I just looked at that 15 gallon a minute US, that's the new well that's coming on, that will come on board. And my calculations say based on that 1,100 liters per day that most building permits are issued. Now, whether they allow more than that, but based on the 1,100, they'll give us about 75 home connections.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's about my calculation too. Then.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Which means with our current wells, though, we have basically a little under 11 US gallons per minute, which would be 55 homes or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm. That sounds about right.
Okay. All right.
Part of our exercise here, the project that we're now doing is going to be doing all those calculations as well, both looking at each LAC service area independently, but more importantly, as a conglomerate, we know that the distribution of demand is not the same as supply. So we need to look at things together, and we also need to look at calculations in terms of the daily yield from individual wells.
Oh, I'm sorry, Glenn, I didn't quite catch that. The audio is a little bit low here. Can you say that again?
Everything that I just said in the last.
No, just the last sentence.
Okay, so.
Then when you leaned forward, it was better.
Okay, sorry about that.
Perfect. Thank you.
We will be doing all those mass balance calculations and recognizing that the distribution of demand isn't the same as the distribution of supply. So we do need to look at things not only within each individual service area, but collectively. And that's one of the big decisions that will have to be made is where is water supplied and how is it shared? So we need to consider all properties within the 3 service areas. The other thing that we need to consider, and here we're talking about the daily yield of of the pumps, which is certainly one dimension to it. But we also need to look at the annual cycle, recognizing that recharge of the aquifer changes throughout seasons. So an annual cycle mass balance is also something important that we're looking at. And EXP study is looking at those 2 dimensions for us and will be valuable in the evaluation. But we're again, the study is looking at both supply, and we've got just new information now in terms of telling us how much water can be pulled from what location. The second dimension then is storage, and you're all in need of storage for both fire protection and balancing domestic flow. Currently King Edward Bay is in a very solid position on storage. Bowen Bay and Bluewater are not. Arbutus Ridge has plans for a second reservoir, which provides a new opportunity as well. And then the third dimension that we're looking at is fire protection. So recognizing where water supply is coming from, where it's going to be stored, and then how do we return that back through the communities and fire flow demand. So that just gives you, I guess, an overview of all the dimensions that we'll be looking at.
Do you have a schedule from the Arbutus Ridge people as to when they're going to be bringing their lots online? Which years? In other words, a timeline.
We don't have a specific timeline about when they're bringing lots online. They've sent an email yesterday, their consultant has, indicating that we should expect their proposals for the phase 3 and 4 developments in the next couple of weeks. And the phase 2, I mean, the lots are developed and serviced. So I guess it just depends on, you know, the sale and construction schedule of the people who buy those lots.
Thanks very much for that.
Brian.
Sorry, did someone speak there and want to?
Yeah, Brian, I've got a question.
Please go.
I've got an old report, you know, the history person here, from when the petition was coming forward from the King Edward Bay developers to be a municipal system. And there's a report attached to it that talks about they drilled 4 wells. One was non-producing, so they abandoned it. But there were 3 wells that were being contributed, and yet everybody only talks about 2. And I don't know, they refer to well connection 3-97, 4-97, and TW03-1. And the 397 would initially be dormant. So is it still hanging around there? Or is that the one that Arbutus Ridge is activated?
No, it's still there. It's not being used. I'd have to get more information on the history.
I might add, this is Bruce, I could add a little more insight. One of those wells had elevated arsenic.
Right.
So it may have been taken offline as long as the other 2 wells were supporting the initial development. They put that one on hold because you need to do arsenic treatment.
Okay, because there was a 4th one, Bruce, which they abandoned, and he didn't talk about
why they abandoned it.
Something to that, because like Allison, I'm also a historian of sorts. Allison, I think actually what you might be speaking of is well number 9401.
No, I don't even have that. There was the other one was called 2-97, the one they abandoned.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 9701. Yeah, pardon me.
97.
Yeah, that one, as I recall, had a pretty good output, but for some reason was not used.
That's the arsenic one.
No, arsenic I think was the issue with well 9703.
Okay.
That 4th one is actually not very far from the one that's currently in major use.
That's correct. Yeah. So it may have been that. It may have also been that it was easier to. What happened was when the wells were chosen, number 4, 9704 was included, and TW01 was included, which was a more of a legacy well from another property that was part of the package.
Oh, that's
the reading of it.
Probably.
And anyway, it may have been just because that other well was closer to the pump house and just more easy to connect up. But for whatever reason, yeah, my reading of the history is that there is a well out there that was capped or was at least tested and then not used in the master plan.
There are 2 issues about that well, if I could just interject. One is that I believe the well currently sits on private property. And the other issue was, I don't believe that it was ever demonstrated that those 2 wells are independent of each other, which is why one was capped.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable interpretation of what happened.
We will be looking at all of the available wells and how best to use them.
All right. Well, there's a couple of questions I would want to raise with you. I wonder if anyone else, before I jump in, has got something more to say. Well, I was interested. Thank you very much for Glenn. You're talking about the supply and the storage issues. You didn't actually mention the distribution issues, which has been up until very recently monumental, particularly in Bluewater, and profoundly impacting the use of our capital in King Edward Bay. So I must thank the municipality for finally resolving that issue by dealing with spyglass, which is, I'm sure, taking the pressure off all our pumps. So that was one thing. I'm interested though in the new description that I think that I hear quite a lot now. It started to happen a few months ago when people started to talk about a single aquifer serving the whole of the west side, which is a new evolution. That's an interesting one for us. We've not seen that before. And that it's interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, no one has mentioned it before, but also these wells are independent. So it may be part of the same aquifer, but in geological terms, but actually in terms of its water reserves, they're quite separate pockets associated with it. So it doesn't, there can be a building, and in the building there are quite separate apartments, and they've got nothing to do with each other, except if the whole building goes down. And in the same way, there are different parts of the ocean where you will typically find fish, and other parts of the same ocean where you typically won't find fish. So, it's a bit illusory to talk about a single aquifer as being relevant in this discussion, because when we set up these developments, they have to demonstrate that the wells are in fact independent of each other. That's the point. So I just wanted to make the point that talking about it as a single aquifer contributes almost nothing to our discussion. The other issue that you raised that's associated with this is, and I quite understand that there's a distinction between supply and where we get our water and to where it is being demanded. That's a problem too, but there are real implications of that I only recently appear to have been acknowledged by the municipality, and I'm very grateful for this. And that is where it may well be that we've got a big supply in Bluewater and we've got more water in King Edward Bay. That's true. But by linking the King Edward Bay to Bluewater, what you do is that you cause all of the implications of their shortages to be to contaminate, if you like. It's a strong word, not the one I would have chosen with a few moments thought, but the valuation of the properties in King Edward Bay. So we are tainted with the problem of chronic shortages and chronic engineering limitations of supply, storage, and distribution in Bluewater. And that will affect our property values if we continue not to solve those problems and simply rely on King Edward Bay. So one of the things I wanted to just chip in as we were talking about the new reports that are you're now considering is that we would seek an assurance in King Edward Bay that we're not going to continue looking to King Edward Bay as a way of resolving the problems that exist in Bluewater. It's a fundamental issue for us, and it is not sustainable. We already know, for example, that we can, with the water we're currently producing, we can deal with the proposed developments within King Edward Bay. That includes Arbutus Ridge, but we don't have enough water here for Bluewater and King Edward Bay, LAC. So what we'd be doing if we would continue to rely on King Edward Bay to solve the problems in Bluewater is that we'll just push this down the road. We'll have to deal with it sometime.
Yeah. And I think what we're focused on is identifying the best solution to provide the water that everybody needs. And that doesn't just involve King Edward Bay and Bluewater. It also involves Bowen Bay, where the highest producing wells are located. and it may involve other new sources, such as the well on the Stewart property I mentioned earlier.
Sure.
And obviously the new well coming online with Arbutus Ridge. One of the things that you'll see when we make the aquifer study available is that there are a number of ways to improve supply in all three systems, to optimize the supply from Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and Bluewater. And we need to understand what's the most effective way to meet everybody's supply needs and storage needs and distribution needs. And from there, we can look at, what that means in terms of water system financing and project financing and the fairness around that. And, we wouldn't proceed with any kind of solution that's going to compromise existing users' water supply that's already adequate, which is the case in King Edward Bay. I mean, we're not going to move forward with something that's going to compromise your water supply.
Well, that's very reassuring, Patrick. Thank you for that. Very helpful. It's already been compromised. I mean, even fairly recently, we've had an unfortunate incident which has illustrated the point really clearly. We had someone who was trying to sell a property, and when their realtor looked at the history of water supply, a very important and lucrative sale fell through as a result of the history of us being tied, yoked as it were, to Bluewater. Now, fortunately, the way you managed it the last summer, which was very helpful and we're very grateful, separating the management of stages for shortages, well, that resolved the problem, and immediately that house was sold. And in addition, another one was sold. So we have a really nice encompassed illustration of how significant this is to the valuation of our properties. I'm delighted with the way you've been managing it subsequently, and I'm also very pleased for this reassurance you've just given us. I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Has anyone else got anything more to say? Okay, well, let's move on then. We have other updates. Patrick, do you have something further you would like to say on that?
Other than, I mean, like you've identified, the water system is generally functioning and meeting everybody's needs. We did discover recently, in looking at the monitoring data and the flows going to Bluewater relative to the water use within the King Edward Bay system, that was a lot closer than we would expect to see. Because King Edward Bay has so many fewer connections, you expect the use within the KB system to be a lot less. It was a lot higher than we were expecting, and there was a leak discovered in the King Edward Bay system that's been addressed. So the issue of leakage is something that we need to pay close attention to in all of the water systems, not just Bluewater.
Patrick, what was the leak? Was it in the water main, or whereabouts did that take place? It's Bruce.
It was near one of our sample taps, and
yeah,
I believe that's been addressed.
Yeah, I saw them working there yesterday.
And if I may ask, was it something that would indicate that potentially more leaks could emerge? Was there something in the way it was constructed or the way it was designed that could be, an indicator of potential future leaks?
Not that I know of, but that is something that we'll follow up on.
Yeah, because it'd be good to know.
I don't really have any other operation updates. If there's
okay, well, thank you for that. Now, if we could go to the LAC recommendations and staff response. This is Patrick, you again. Sorry, you're in the hot seat again, Patrick.
Oh yeah. hang on here. So I guess this goes back to the LAC meetings from last year. And a number of recommendations were included. And so Annette had produced a summary of the status relating to those. And so I'll just identify the ones relating to KEB. We've talked about the Aquifer study and water rates for municipal systems. Raj will touch on that when we go through the budget. The Spyglass or Windjammer Road repair is related, and we talked about that already. The water system improvements work we've touched on. Drawings for the water systems were provided. There really isn't anything else on this list that we haven't touched on that I can see.
All right. Well, let's, any other comments or questions that people have about follow up to the last minutes? No, shall we go on then? So we've given us, you've talked about the water drawings. Did you have anything more to say about the water system drawings or the distribution system or interconnections? There's nothing more to say there?
Not unless you have questions about them.
There was, can I just say, we have recurringly and heard rumors of a concern that exists in Bluewater and about Bluewater, water that's produced in Bluewater being pumped back into the King Edward Bay system. And this is what I thought you were going to raise with the illustrations of the drawings of the various works. It seems to me that that's not likely because of the physics of it, but can we just kill that off? Can we just make a comment about that? That it doesn't seem possible, neither does it seem likely. We only measure it going one way. So
we don't have water flowing from Bluewater to King Edward Bay.
Well, thank you for that. I'll be more confident when that's presented to me and I can respond appropriately to that then. Thanks.
Yeah. Brian, can I follow up on that and ask Steph to ensure that that comment is in the minutes?
Very helpful.
Comment that the water does not flow to Bluewater?
Does not and has not flown from Bluewater. It's just one of those ideas that it's a zombie.
It's a zombie. Good way to put it. Yes.
But I think that clarity in that regard is important because I think it does concern some people in Bluewater, but they need to know that it's not happening.
It arose following a discussion, a public discussion in which it was revealed that because of the relative heights of the storage tanks, Bluewater tank has a space at the top of it always cannot be filled because once we're connected to them, the physics of it is such that we'll never fill that last 6 feet or whatever it happens to be. And the belief was therefore that the water was draining back from their storage capacity back into the King Edward Bay, and we were in some way squandering it. I don't know what the concern was, but that's where it has its genesis. So it'd be helpful to have it in the minutes if we can just resolve it. Thanks.
That's brilliant engineering, by the way, having the tanks at different levels. I don't know if anybody thought about doing that, but I'm sure that that will be a paradigm for the future development and building of storage tanks.
I think they were built before they were connected. That was the problem.
Well, maybe there's been an earthquake and we're lower. I don't know.
Ryan, can I ask a question as well?
Sure, please do.
And this may have been asked at prior meetings, and I know it's been discussed at prior meetings, but has it been resolved as to the water metering measurements between King Edward Bay and Bluewater when water is transferred to the Bluewater system? Do we now know that it's being accurately measured?
I believe so. I'm not aware of
There's been comments in the past that there was inaccuracies or potential inaccuracies of the measurements of the amount of water that was actually being transferred versus what was being reported. Do you recall that, Brian?
I do recall that.
Yeah.
I think there was an issue about, I don't want to complicate it too much, but I think the inclination was always for the municipality to use water that measurements of the water at household, so the water being actually used rather than the water that was actually delivered. And so the concern was to monitor it at the link, and that's what we've been waiting for. We've wanted that data.
Yeah,
we've all known that huge amounts of water have been sent there, but the readings from the domestic points of use has been much less than that. I could see Glenn wanting to say something.
I think I can probably help Patrick out a little bit on that one because I think it predates his time here. Yeah. I think when we were doing the investigation in 2019, we started poking into all the data, and there was discrepancies, and we had checked the calibration of those meters and found that there were some inaccuracies. So the public works folks then had the meters calibrated. In fact, I think in one case, maybe one was replaced, but calibrated for sure. So there's a belief that that issue has since been resolved and has been resolved through 2020. I think the only recommendation is perhaps for Patrick to follow up with the guys and maybe ask that they be checked again now that we're a year in since that work was done, just to verify that, yes, they are in fact reporting the way they should.
Michael.
Yes, thanks. This whole issue arose when our resident statistician, Dr. Donald Heath, did some calculations as to production and consumption. So we do have a way, once we have the 2020 numbers, of confirming what the meters say, at least in a global, within margin of error way. And Don may do it again. I don't know if I want to impose that on him, but it might be nice if the municipality also followed that process and did that calculation.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm alluding to there, Glenn? Or
yeah, I think it's definitely good. I think we always needed supply and or supply through those bulk meters in comparison to the demand meters at the properties are certainly a good indicator, and I fully support checking those numbers. But what isn't captured in there is leakage. So
yeah, I appreciate that, and
right.
It would also would incidentally be a sign that there's a leak that we're not aware of, if that makes sense, if there's a dramatic difference. And that's,
I might say too, and I can say this being possibly ignorant here because I'm not an engineer, but it seems to me it might help identify where the leak is. Because if the discrepancy shows up on the King Edward Bay side, then you know one thing. If it shows up on the Bluewater side, you know something else.
No, for sure, but there's two dimensions here to what we're talking about. One is using those meters as a calculator to determine if it looks like there's a reasonable mass balance, but that doesn't answer the question as to whether a particular meter is calibrated and functioning properly. To actually validate the function of a meter, then it needs a technician to calibrate it.
Right. So what I'm arguing for is, the value of that technician checking it.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It is important.
And in the end, the cost per unit of water that we're shipping to Bluewater is dependent not on what the use is at the point of use, but at the distribution. That's where the link is. So we really have to have those two numbers over the same time period in the same using the same measurement.
Yeah, and it's important to both water systems that cost be accurately determined.
Yeah, precisely, because it could be estimating it in Bluewater's disfavor. It could be overcharging them.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks very much. That was very helpful. Okay, so we are There's a recommendation at the end of this by the looks of it. Hang on. No, we're down to finance now. So Raj, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much. Steph, I'm just going to share the screen so people can follow along with what I'm talking about here. Bear with me for just a sec. So is everybody seeing my PowerPoint slides here?
Yes. Okay.
So essentially the objective of the finance section here is to explain the cost pressures for 2020 and provide the local area committee with information proposed to be included in the 5-year financial plan on both the operating and the capital budget, and for the LAC to make a recommendation to council with respect to those inclusions. So just a little bit about the operating budget here. So the expenses of the water system must be supported by the revenues collected from, and essentially each water system, we have an expenditure provision for administrative costs, which are allocated to the system, and for direct costs of direct operations costs within the system. So administrative costs allocated to the system include a portion of administrative salaries and benefits, municipal liability insurance or audit fees, IT support costs, municipal hall rent, and office supplies and postage. In terms of direct costs, again, operating wages of the utilities operators includes supplies and services, contract services specific to that water, incurred specific to that water system, any property insurance based on valuations of the equipment, and then maintenance and infrastructure of equipment, and any utility costs of operating the system. And in terms of the 2021 operating expenditure pressures, we're anticipating a $1,300 increase in the allocated salaries and benefits cost to Bluewater Park. And we are also anticipating a $20,000 increase in the contribution to reserves, which I'll go over in just a quick sec. So we are recommending a 20% increase to rates in or to revenue in 2021. Most of that going towards the contribution to reserves. That is a recommended contribution across almost all water systems, as the capital reserve balances to address infrastructure replacement and renewal needs are relatively light across all water systems in comparison to the infrastructure replacement value. So based on these parameters here, we've got a 5-year proposed operating budget here. What is included in 2021 here that is a little bit unique, in the other revenue number here in the 17.1, it was probably a little bit presumptuous of me to assume that all 11 new lots would come on, get connected in 2021.
Gosh, you mind making
that assumption? And so basically, oh, sorry, Steph.
You want to make it a little bit bigger for the people?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
That's okay.
Here, hold on. How is that? Can everybody see that?
Yes.
So 2017, the other revenue provision includes $16,500 for new connections based on the new phase in the subdivision. And if we don't collect that revenue, we won't make a contribution to the reserve. It's assumed that the new connection revenue will be contributed to the reserve for capital renewal and replacement. Other than that, I talked about the increase in the salaries and provision, or the salaries and benefits provision, and the remainder expenditure provisions just take into consideration inflation from the previous year. Is so small in a provision, and we're dealing with rounded numbers in the budget, that you don't see an impact of inflation in 2021 on operating expenditures. The significant increase to the transfer to surplus in reserves is a result of the $16,500 plus the proposed 20% increase in utility rates. One thing worth noting, when we were there was quite a bit of discussion about Bluewater Park and water being transferred to the Bluewater Park. So if we were to look at the 2020 budget, the transfer of water to Bluewater Park, we budgeted $15,000 in 2020. And without that provision of transferring water to Bluewater Park, the utility rates within KEB would be significantly higher than they currently are. So I had done a quick calculation this morning, and just basically the 2020 fixed rate for a property in Bluewater is $780. And then basically, if and the 2021 rate would work out to approximately $960 based on the same number of connections as we had in 2020 if we apply a 20% increase in rates. If there was not a recovery of costs from Bluewater Park, the expenditures would not go down because the expenditures in Bluewater Park, in King Edward Bay, are relatively fixed. And if you didn't have that recovery coming from Bluewater Park and you had to pay for your expenditures, each property would be paying $1,700 per year as opposed to the $960 in 2021. So there is a recovery and a benefit to KEB users from transferring water to the Bluewater Park system, in that it subsidizes the rates of operating the King Edward Bay system. Is there any questions on the operating budget before I move on to the capital budget?
Brian, I've got one if that's okay to ask Raj. It's Allison. I was just trying to look at, so what would that per unit number be if you had assumed that everybody, the other new units were connected?
Sorry, Allison, I lost the last part of what you were saying.
Well, I think you said it would be $1,700 without the Bluewater Park paying water revenue.
That's correct.
So what would it be? And that's based on 29 connected properties?
Yes.
So what would it be if it was 41 connected properties?
I can do the calculations a little bit later. I haven't done.
I could, I could just divide 41 into that. Figure it out.
You should be able to do that. Yeah.
So I guess part of my reason for asking that was there should be maybe some sort of if all the Bluewater Park problems got solved and there was no more water sharing, we need to be doing maybe gradually increasing the rates so that we get to a number that's, we don't have a huge hit all at one point when that water sharing no longer happens.
The hope is, if I may interject, that there will be more connections made in the next few years, and we have another 9 coming very quickly. So actually the real number is 50, not 41. And then subsequently there's another phase that will also benefit to that. So ideally we will not feel that kind of hit. And as Bluewater Park hopefully becomes increasingly independent, which we hope it does and would encourage it to be so, that it would have a very little hit on King Edward Bay because we'll be filling up with our own connections by then.
I have a question, Brian.
Dawn was next, and then Michael.
Well, sorry, Michael, I didn't mean to jump in front of you.
You didn't.
Okay, great.
Sorry, do you think there's value in putting us all back on the screen, or do you guys want to keep the budget up?
Why don't we keep the budget up, at least for mine? Thanks, Steph. Raj, I was curious, on the 2019 actuals, you're saying that the income from utility rates is $25,295. So I was comparing that to what we had last year in actuals for 2018, which was $29,583. So I'm wondering why it's so much less this year as opposed to last year. Because this should be relatively static with the number of connections, shouldn't it?
It should be, I can look into that for you, Don. I don't have an answer for that because I didn't look at the comparison of 2018 to 2019 actual, but I will look into that and get an answer back to everybody.
Okay, can you get it? You'll be able to get it to everybody then, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
I can address that.
And again, to further step on Michael's toes here, could I ask a second question?
Sure.
Which is, how did you determine the amount of the transfers to the reserve fund? I mean, it's up 20,000. Was that a figure you wanted to come to, or is it, in other words, what I'm asking for is, how did you set the targets for the reserve fund?
So what I've done for 2021, part of the increase in 2021 is coming from the one-time revenue of 16,500 from the new properties that will connect to the system. And the remainder is coming from the remainder of the increase. So if we took basically there's a $20,000 increase, 16,500 is coming from the new properties that will connect. There's 11 properties at $1,500 each. So that leaves about $4,000, and the $4,000 is coming through a rate increase. So what I'm doing is I am looking to increase the contribution to reserves to an anticipated amount that will cover basically to an amount that will be suitable to take care of the infrastructure renewal and replacement needs of the system. Generally speaking, I don't know what that number is at this time. We need to be further along in the asset management work. However, best recommendations indicate that for brand new infrastructure, a contribution of 1% of the replacement cost of infrastructure is recommended. So the King Edward Bay system is not all that old. It's relatively new, but we're not at 1%. We're not contributing that 1% recommended value. So as our asset management work progresses, we'll have a better idea of what the long-term maintenance and replacement needs of the system will be. And then we can calculate back based on the long-term maintenance needs what an adequate contribution to reserves would be based on the needs.
Okay. Well, Allison already alluded to this, but I mean, it's a jump in the transfer of 140%. So it's quite a large transition. And I'm not arguing for or against whether it's a necessary one, but since this is a 5-year plan, it seems to me, and I don't mean to jump ahead to your presentation on the capital reserve, but it seems to me there should be a 5-year plan for what the amount of the reserve is. You have a 5-year plan for the distributions from it, but what would be good would be to see not only the historical amounts in the reserve, but also the projected over 5 years, so we can see whether or not it's increasing too low, too fast, or just about right. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. And we can incorporate that into a presentation. I have done a 5-year analysis on the projected balance of all of the utility reserves.
Yeah.
So I do have that information, and I can incorporate that within a presentation.
Yeah, you see, as soon as a 20% hike in the water rates coming after what we hiked last year, we're going to get questions on this. And I guess the answer that I'll have to give is that, well, this was an amount that was considered necessary to put into the reserve fund. But then the next question is going to be, well, why is it that amount as opposed to some other amount? So I think what's really helpful to us is to know what your targets are year by year going into the future, because otherwise it looks like, well, let's pick a number because it's a nice round number and use that. And I don't think that's going to be sufficient.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Don, we need to do a longer term projection and be further ahead in our asset management work to provide that projection of what the reserve balance should be. Right.
Oh, precisely. And you'll probably recall, I've been advocating this for some time too, that we need to be looking at this. So I'm not in principle against this, but I just want to make sure it's done in a way that is transparent, that's explainable, and is right.
That's very helpful, Don. That's a useful comment that has been brought up in King Edward Bay a number of times. So thank you for that. I think Michael has got something you'd also want to add there.
Yeah, actually, Don, you didn't step on my toes. In fact, I feel like I piggybacked. I have one very minor question and then a more general one, Raj. The minor one has to do with, I know there's going to be at least 2 occupancy certificates issued next year. We have 2 builds that are going very well. We have another owner who will be seeking approval with their plans very shortly. So do you take into account the increase in the fees that those people pay as they become resident owners and not just connections?
So what I've taken into consideration here is actually, I did not take into consideration the additional revenue from connected properties. What I've shown here in utility rates is the amount of revenue that's required to basically balance out the system. So I've calculated out what our expenses are going to be, and I've taken a look at what I project transfers from Bluewater Park will be for each year, and the balancing figure is the revenue I need from utilities. So basically we're balanced, and in the equation we've got a contribution to reserve. So I haven't done an exact calculation on what the rate to each household would be. So I should be taking those numbers into consideration when it comes to calculating the individual household rates.
Okay, that's good. And that actually gives rise to my second question. Will there be a further opportunity to comment on the budget before it's sent to council?
The public, well, there is the public consultation period that will happen in January, between mid-December to the middle of January. So there'll be opportunities as a member of the public to comment on the budget at that point, and those comments will be taken into consideration, but there won't be another meeting with the LAC.
Okay. Okay, I will look for Steph's email eventually. Thank you.
Brian, did you see my hand up? It's Allison.
Allison, I did.
Sorry, can I jump in front of
Go
Allison?
ahead.
Sorry, the communication regarding public consultation for the budget will be not coming from me. It will come from the BIM Municipality Regular Communications channels.
Okay, I'll get it
We're
anyway.
receiving those. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So 2 things. One, just following up on that comment Steph made. Steph, could you, I know it goes out through the regular news channels to anybody who has subscribed to the BIM news and notices, but could it also ask Sophie to send it to anybody who has subscribed to the water system news and notices? Because they may have subscribed to the water system, but not the general BIM one.
Sure.
So my sort of comment, and I was going to say, this is the first year, from my perspective, your utility rates should equal total expenses or be greater. And this is the first year that that's happened.
Yeah.
Because the other 2 sources of revenue are not, they're sort of gratis extra things, and putting those 2 sources into your reserve fund makes sense. And once they disappear, then your utility rates are going to have to pay for your reserve fund contributions. So I would have answered the question to Raj by saying, well, my utility, I've set your expenses are 34.4, so your utility rates have to be 34.4, and everything else goes into the reserve.
It's quite right. I mean, there's two things here. One, there is a debate to be had, as Michael was alluding to, about the nature of these expenses and the contribution that LACs may have in advising about those expenses, not all of which are clear to us, and particularly when we're talking about consultancy fees and so on. So there's one issue that has to be dealt with, but the real problem here is we would not be talking about it at all had all our connections been made. And if we had all our connections, we would be accumulating our capital at the rate we hoped. Well, we're not being able to do that because we don't have the connections made. So there we are. We just have to pay the extra. Okay. Raj, can I hand this back to you?
Could I have just one other question then?
Sure, of course you can.
Before we leave the operating budget, the 20%, how does that compare to other recommendations for other water districts?
So the recommendation in most water districts is for a 20% rate increase. Hood Point has relatively healthy reserve balances in contrast to their replacement value. So the recommendation in Hood Point was for a 10% increase in rates in 2020. And Cove Bay is quite unique because they have taken on long-term borrowing and other debt financing to fund the Cove Bay water treatment plant. So the recommendation there will be quite different from all the other water systems and is not comparable.
Okay, thank you, Raj.
Raj, have you anything more you want to pursue with this?
If there's no other questions on the operating budget, I'm going to move over to the capital budget. So the capital budget it was sent out with the agenda package. I won't go through the individual projects here. I probably won't be able to answer questions on the details of the projects. Anyways, it'll be Patrick who'll be answering, but essentially we're looking at a project budget provision of $13,100 in 2021. What this does is it takes the funding from the estimated reserve opening balance of $66,500 and puts it in the budget as a provision. If the funding is not spent in 2021 on these projects, the funding will be returned to the source at the end of the year. And essentially I've included at the bottom of the slide here, I've just included a estimated value of the replacement cost of infrastructure for the King Edward Bay system. And once we finish with this slide, I've got information in a subsequent slide on what makes up the 3.7 million estimate. And it's just an estimate, so we have to do further work on nailing down the accuracy and also further work on determining the condition of all of the infrastructure.
Brian, I'm not sure you can see my hand because I know we have an abbreviated list there.
I got you.
Could I, Raj, just clarification, what are the figures after each of the line items? The 20K, 2,400?
So the 20K happens to be the entire budget amount. So where we've got amounts here, I've put what the project cost is, and there's a portion of the project cost allocated to the particular water system based on the projected effort or cost of each project that should be funded from the water system. So for example, the water meter upgrades is, now that 300, I'm going to have to double check that number. That looks like a calculation error, but may not be but essentially, quickly speaking, if the number of connections in King Edward, so it's in projects where it's shared across all water systems, it would be prorated based on the number of connections in each water system over the total number of connections. And it may not be an error because there's so few connections in King Edward Bay in comparison to the overall.
Well, also the equipment is new too, so there's probably a lot less requirement for upgrade.
Yeah, so it may very well be a correct amount. It's just looks odd to have $300 as a budget line item, given it's small.
Yeah, and especially given that we're talking figures like 20,000 or 400,000.
Yeah. But generally speaking, that's the total cost of the overall project. So we're looking at upgrading all of the water meters. The 2020 provision is for essentially, I believe, consulting works And then the actual implementation and change and putting the water meters in provision is included in 2022. So it's a placeholder.
Raj, can I just concern that that 400,000 that you refer to on that top line, an expenditure is largely consultancy work?
No, 400,000, my understanding would be the actual replacement cost of the water meters. So the cost of the water meters and putting them in and taking the old ones out.
But in a place like King Edward Bay, we don't need that.
Well, it may not be something that we end up moving forward with, but the driver for looking at this is essentially long-term operation costs of having manually read meters by the operation staff. There's a cost to that would exceed if they're remote monitoring capability meters. Not only does it reduce the ongoing operation costs associated with meter reading, but it provides much better information on an ongoing basis to help.
I'm absolutely with you. I see every day a truck going by my door and checking the water. Presumably, we no longer need to do that, and no longer.
There'd still be water sampling, but not meter. There'd still be water sampling, but not meter reading manually. That would be the idea.
Yeah, so we should see some cost savings as a result of that change.
And mainly that's what
there's no point in doing it without that, is there?
Probably not. And that's mainly what the 20K in 2021 is intended to be, is looking at, well, is there a decent business case for moving forward with this?
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Raj, did you want to move on then?
I think Allison was waving.
Allison, I didn't see you move, sorry.
And Mike also.
Sorry, guys.
The question about the meters, I mean, we're talking about putting in remote read meters, and I guess I'm thinking in an area like King Edward Bay where there's a new housing going in, you're going to put a brand new meter in and then 6 months later pull it out and put in a remote read. I mean, is there a thought to, once you decide to go ahead with the remote read, that any new house puts in the remote read meter?
That would make sense, yeah.
A version of the rest of them later?
Yeah, that would make sense once we're at that point.
Good, well done. Thanks, Allison. Michael.
Actually, I had the same thought Allison did, so how about that?
Okay, then.
But let me just make a more general point that it would be great if we could all individually measure our consumption and manage it rather than having to lift up the heavy metal plate to check. So I know that's one of your goals, Patrick, so I would just commend you to pursue that.
Okay, and then Brian.
Don?
Raj, why do some of these items appear here and are funded out of the reserve as opposed to appearing in the operating expenses?
So capital costs can vary from year to year. So your operating budget contains a provision for the contribution to the reserve. And then the reserve is used to fund capital. So that's the general principle across the general fund for all capital and across all water systems, that essentially if you were to fund capital works out of the operating budgets, the capital needs vary from year to year. You would have rates going way up in one year and way down in another year and way up in another year. So we're trying to smooth the rates out and have gradual changes over time.
So, but software doesn't seem to me to be a capital expense. I guess you're saying that it can have those fluctuations.
It is a project expense, so I've called it a capital budget, but this is a project budget.
Okay. Also, the annual provision for water systems to replace equipment, the $10,000. I was just looking at the capital budget submitted in previous years, and $10,000 wasn't on every year. It seemed to alternate. One year was 10,000, the next year was 0, then 10,000 again. Zero the
It's-
following year. This now you have a 10,000 each year. Is there something
it's-
changed?
It's prudent to put it in each year because essentially it's a provision. And if for example, well, this is a future looking budget. So essentially we're not taking anything out of reserves, but you could potentially have needs in that year. So I would put a 10,000 annual provision in across the board. And if you don't need it, it goes back to your reserve. So if, for example, we went into 2021 and we didn't have a provision and we required an emergency repair to be made, we wouldn't have the authority under the financial plan to do that because the provision hasn't been approved.
Mm-hmm.
So if you got a provision there, it would allow us to go in and make a repair almost immediately without.
That sounds prudent. And one final question then on this one. The reserve balance, it's stated there as estimated. Can you give me an idea what the error bars on that are?
It's essentially the estimate. The reason it's estimated is I've projected what's going to go back into the reserve of the unused funding for 2020 and we're at the end of 2020. So I believe in your case, it's a very close estimate of what the reserve balance is. So I've taken a look at what the opening balance for 2021 was, taken out what we had projected to be the capital budget, and then added back what I anticipate to return to the fund.
Okay. Well, if it's not too much trouble, this just echoes what I was saying earlier. I think it'd be useful to have a year by year statement of what the balance is, because then we can look back and we can get the exact figures, even if looking at the present day estimate, it can't be that exact. But at least we can know where we were in the past and see how we're going in the future. So if it's not difficulty to line up the reserve balance in the same way you've done the expenditures, I think that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, we'll take a look at incorporating a 5-year estimate of reserve balances in the financial plan booklet. So essentially, as we go through the financial plan process, we always produce a copy of the financial plan in a book format. It has several schedules, so I will venture to get a 5-year schedule for utility reserves forecast in there.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm breaking my promise. That was my last question. I did have one thing that occurred to me some time ago, which was, where do we see these figures in the Muni's statement of assets and liabilities? That is, all I could see there when it came to infrastructure reserve funds was one for Cove Bay, which I think is appropriate, but I wasn't sure where all the other water districts had their funds listed. Does it appear on the financial?
They do appear in the statutory reserves. I believe this is a statutory reserve. I have to double check that, but I believe they were in the listed in the 2019 financial statement notes. In the statutory reserve section, there is a note in the financial statement.
Yeah, I was
get back to you on that.
Well, I was looking for it. I certainly didn't see it, but certainly I could have missed it too. So, all right, thank you.
It's never been in the earlier reserves, Don. It's only showed up in 2019.
Oh, okay.
It was missed in previous years, so we
that annual report a few months back. So
we picked that up in 2019 when we were going through. I was going through all the statutory reserves, so we picked those up as having been missed in previous years.
Okay.
Being missed as in being reported, not being missed.
Oh yeah, right. I gotcha.
Well, thank you, Raj. You have more to tell us, I think.
I just had one final slide, and it's more for interest, I think, so that it's an expansion on this 3.7 million number. It's, again, basically, Glenn had done some good work for us last year in expanding the replacement values of the infrastructure and applying 2019 replacement rates to the equipment that was there. And so essentially you can see that of the 3.7 million in replacement costs, about 1.8 million is attributed to the water mains and just over $1 million to the reservoir. And those are the main larger components of the 3.7 million replacement cost. I thought you might find that interesting, that there is some backup behind the $3.7 million.
And this is part of your continued work on asset management, which is a big project for you, I'm sure.
That is correct.
It's very helpful.
By the way, Raja, if I interpret this right, these are the replacement costs of the things themselves, not necessarily the amount of labor that it would take to put in a water main. Is that right?
I would assume that the labor would be built into that. I can't answer that definitively, but I'm assuming that the replacement cost takes into consideration the labor as well. But I could be wrong.
Okay, and I have one more question along the lines of fun with numbers. Raj, if I took that $66,500 figure as the opening balance for the reserve, and then for 2021 and subsequent years off your operating budget, added the transfers out, but then subtracted the amounts that you had under water utility projects, and then watched the reserve magically grow, that would be more or less a good way of estimating how the reserve is going to grow, right?
Jen, yeah, that would be, and I do have a 5-year schedule that does do that. So,
okay, I was kind of hoping that would be slide 8, but
I could have put it in here as a slide. I could have cut and pasted it from the spreadsheet that I have it in. I will do that in subsequent presentations, because that would have been a good idea to include it. Oversight on my part.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
And I'm going to stop sharing before Steph asks me to.
So can I share then? Ryan, I'm just going to share the resolution.
Please do.
I'm getting the right one. This is what's in the agenda. Do you have any comments that you want to include, or would you like to just on what's been presented for council?
Well, I guess I'm assuming some clarification on my question earlier to Raj about why 2019 seems to be lower than 2018. So I'm assuming that will go out to the committee before this has to be brought forward. Is that right? I mean, I know we have to consider it now, but the next step is that this goes to the municipal review prior to going to council. I guess I just would like some clarification that column figure is correct, because it seems to me somewhat anomalous.
Sorry, was that in the operating or capital?
That was the operating.
Okay, so can you just say the words you would like?
Actually, Don, just to add to that, both of those column figures, I believe, are correct. I just need to provide you with a variance explanation, a year to year.
Yeah, fair enough. You're right. Okay.
But we have looked at essentially I did look at a historical trend of 5 years of the actuals, and they seem to be relatively consistent. So I'm happy to provide you with that explanation, but I don't believe that would impact the budget analysis.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, that's fair enough. So Steph, I don't think I need to add anything here on that comment. I'll take it as read that those figures are accurate.
Actually, before we do vote on that, can I just answer one question? Because Aoife actually just made me aware she had looked into the KEB reserves. So when we talk about the financial statements, Don, or statutory reserves in there, and so a statutory reserve is a reserve that's been created by council by bylaw. So the KEB reserve is not a statutory reserve. It's so it hasn't been created by bylaw, is my understanding, but I will double check that. I mean, we do manage it like a statutory reserve, however. So for that reason, it's not included in the financial statements.
Okay, so it's not in the state.
Reserves are, but the
Well, it
KEB
is
one
in the
isn't.
unappropriated surplus number
Yeah.
for the water systems, which is all one big lump. I did exactly the same piece of research that AFA did, and I'm just guessing from memory. No, that's not. We have to set up a statutory reserve, Steph.
No,
So we can
I
do
don't
one
know
of-
what to say.
yeah.
I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
We can do one of two things. I mean, there should be a I believe you want to have a recommendation from the LAC for council to treat or to set the KEB reserve up as a statutory reserve.
Yes, because I remember reading through the minutes from Bluewater's meeting that they were told it was not a statutory reserve. So that's why I was a little bit surprised to hear your explanation earlier. So are the figures are then in an unappropriated or undifferentiated fund? Is that what you're saying, Allison?
So,
Yeah. Another
in our-
note on
yeah.
state.
Oops,
So
sorry.
in our financial statements, Don, they would show up in a appropriated surplus number. I mean, actually statutory reserves are also generally part of the total surplus number, but they're broken out separately. Just reported in a different line item in the notes.
Okay.
If you look at note 8 for the 2019 financial statements, note 8 accumulated surplus. There's a line that's called water utilities surplus, 744,406. And then there's another line that's statutory reserve funds, note 9. And that has everybody else with a reserve fund but King Edward Bay. And because King Edward Bay was new, you didn't have any reserve funds. All the other systems did come in with reserve funds. And way back in the beginning, we set up bylaws to establish all their statutory reserves. And I found those bylaws in cleaning out my office.
If it was my office, you'd never find them. Okay, so I think that, so you're saying that we should have had this thing in there.
No, you never had enough money to bother having a statutory reserve.
Okay. True, but now
it's building up.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So-
can I just
Your
confirm?
motion should be that council directs staff to establish a statutory reserve fund for King Edward Bay. And to transfer their existing surplus reserve fund into that.
Just as you're typing that,
Surplus reserve fund.
Is there actually a benefit to doing that? I mean, is there a requirement that we have a statutory reserve? And
There
is
isn't a
disadvantages?
requirement. The one advantage to you would be is that the municipality is required to accrue interest on statutory reserves. So we have been doing that in practice for this reserve anyways. Other operating reserves, we don't do that for. But that's the legal requirement. But other than that, and I guess a statutory reserve, the terms of the reserve would be funds from that reserve would be limited by the terms of reference within the reserve.
And it shows up as your.
Sorry, Alison, can I just jump in there? There's a discussion to be had about the nature of those terms. Now, should we see those before we agree to this? I mean, what I don't want to do is I don't want to hamstring us with a decision to develop a statutory reserve fund that has to be managed in a particular way for legal reasons that results in us being unable to spend it as we like, or put another way, would make us vulnerable if we don't do this.
Well, I guess, Brian, what you would want to do, the only provision I believe you would want to have in the reserve is that the reserve funds can only be used for capital projects within the King Edward Bay system. If you reserve it for King Edward Bay system. Other than that, I don't think you would need any other restrictive provisions for that reserve, because then essentially it protects us from being able to repurpose those reserve funds for some other purpose. So as an operating reserve, without having that piece of, without it being a statutory reserve, we could potentially repurpose that reserve for something else.
Well, then we better have it quickly then. I'm sure you wouldn't do any such thing, but there we are.
Actually, we do need some money in some other reserves.
Okay.
Well, it is easier to show the public that their money is going into saving to replace stuff in the future when they need it and that kind of thing.
The only other thing I'm going to recommend is that essentially in that resolution that was being written up for the transfer of funds to the statutory reserve, I'm not quite sure how to word it, but I wouldn't want to say that all surplus funds be transferred to that reserve, but rather those funds that are currently in the reserve for capital renewal and replacement be transferred, because there is a small amount of surplus funds in what's called the operating surplus. And those are the funds that kind of see you through the operating budget of the organization before we collect your water fees.
Yeah.
So it's capital reserve fund. They're exist as capital reserve funds.
That would be great if you could, modify the wording to say that.
Capital reserve fund.
Funds. Within
Capital reserve fund balance.
Reserve funds
balance. Yeah, and you can get rid of the plural on the fund.
Pardon? Allison, I missed you.
No S on funds. No, back up. Yes, that S. Yeah.
What happened?
What happened?
Can you see it now?
Yep. See it now.
I don't know what I'm so afraid of. I don't have anything bad on my computer, but
So Raj, can we
it's a very guilty conscience. I don't want you guys seeing my biz.
Can we
So, am I right? Is this the proposal that we're voting on at this moment then?
Yes.
If you want a reserve fund, otherwise we can defer it to another meeting.
I don't see that we need to do that. Is there any objection to us pursuing this proposal right now?
Brian, I don't have an objection, but I just want to confirm the rubber hits the road when we set the annual fee, and I believe there's further consultation before that's done. Is that right, Raj?
No.
Essentially, fees will be set. There won't be further consultation. The fees will be set to generate the amount of revenue that is in the financial.
Anything else, Steph?
I mean, they will probably, in terms of setting fees, last year what we did was we tried to keep the fees relatively the same across the water systems, so across the west side water systems, and I believe we would venture to do the same. But we do, and so we try to strike the balance between the rates being the same and being able to generate the revenue that's required for the system.
Right, and my concern then is I don't want my supporting this motion, which I otherwise would support, to be seen as supporting the 20% increase that's proposed in your footnote.
Well, that can be included if the committee.
And I'll tell you why. Because you have a budget amount for the transfer from Bluewater of $17,000, when in 2019 it was in fact $27,000. We don't know what the 2020 number is yet. So I would just like more information before I pay the bill, I guess.
It is a huge increase. That's
Michael, if I could go back to Allison's point that she made earlier, and that was that the 2020 revenue number that's proposed of $34,400
utility rate
mirrors the expenses of the system, so which it should. Otherwise, KEB is not paying for the expenses of it.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see where you're
at.
And
then essentially whatever is being transferred over to Bluewater would be going into your reserve, because they're not putting a strain on the operating cost of your system. I mean, they are using your system, so any contribution that's recovered from Bluewater should rightfully go into the reserve.
Okay, but that's not consistent with your earlier statement that we're saving money on our fees because of the transfers to Bluewater.
We have in prior years.
You have been in prior years.
Right. Okay.
And what I had said was if you didn't have that revenue, so you could look at it a different way. If you didn't have that 17,000 from Bluewater in 2021, and you didn't have the one-time injection of connection fees that I budgeted for, you would essentially be putting nothing into your reserve in 2021.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm sure you do expect to hear from other Bowen Islanders on this issue. And now you've heard from me. So thank you.
So we're taking that out?
So Raj, just one quick question for you on the bullet about the reserve fund, just so we don't confuse council. Because we're talking about establishing a statutory reserve and putting money from a capital reserve fund into it. Should we just say that the capital reserve fund within
King Edward Bay? Yeah.
If we added within surplus.
Sorry, what is it?
I think what I would say, if you don't want to confuse council, is after the word fund, Allison, capital reserve fund for works in the King Edward Bay system. Does that work? That should be clear.
It's still talking about a reserve fund. So is it called capital works or is it?
Well, we can change we'll change the wording to reflect the exact name of what the reserve is called.
Somebody asked the question.
But I think the resolution does encompass its intention.
Yeah.
All right, that's helpful. So shall we vote on that? Shall I propose this formally, and can I have a seconder to this, please?
Well,
thank you, Don. And
I'm taking this 20% out then. Is that what's happening?
Well, I would still like there to be some comment that that we are not approving the 20% increase by passing this motion.
Well, you are.
Well, that's my concern.
Because you're approving the budget, which shows.
But see, here's my problem. Am I the only one that sees the inconsistency between claiming that the transfers from Bluewater mitigate the King Edward Bay rates, and yet there is a deeming provision that the money from Bluewater goes into the capital reserve? That is effectively bootstrapping.
By bootstrapping, you mean limiting our use of that money?
Yeah, if you deem the money to go into the reserve, then of course, whatever amount that is creates a larger reserve, as opposed to determining what the appropriate reserve is and then working backwards to include in that reserve not just the Bluewater contribution, maybe not all of it, maybe part of the Bluewater contribution plus some of the fees paid by the owners. That's all. It just seems improper to me to make that decision on that basis.
Yeah. I'm not sure that is the basis. Let me just get my thoughts in order here. I mean, I think it's not that money, in my understanding, Raj, tell me if I've got this wrong, that money is being taken from Bluewater, paying for the services, the water that we are providing, and being put into the reserve. In a sense, it is just stopping other money being taken and put into that reserve.
No.
So we're talking about a direct connection, that money that is brought in from Bluewater, although all the expense associated with providing that water is coming out of our revenue budget, our operating budget. The return we get for that is actually going into our capital reserve. And if that's the case, then I think Michael is absolutely right. We don't want to be doing that necessarily.
Brian, can I
jump in?
Yeah, I just, I think, and Raj, maybe you can correct me, but I think we're trying to develop a financial plan here that assumes that at some point, and it may not be this coming year, we will become an independent system again and not be relying on Bluewater to be purchasing a sufficient amount of water to support our capital commitments. Is that not the intent here? And I guess we can't plan financially for the ongoing never-ending assumption that Bluewater is going to continue to draw from our water system.
Is what I am trying to move towards, but by the I mean, I've actually built in a provision for a continued transfer to Bluewater for the next 5 years. And so if that is the strategy to actually not be transferring water to Bluewater, perhaps in the 2000, I need to make an amendment to this plan here, which shows a reduction in the amount of recovery for transfer of water to Bluewater Park, rather than, in fact, a increase in the recovery each year. So if we're trying to move towards in this financial plan, a system that's not transferring water to Bluewater Park, then that revenue source or that transfer of funds from Bluewater to King Edward Bay needs to be reduced, in which case the balancing reduction down below would be a reduction to the surplus and reserves number, because your expenses are not going to go down.
Right.
As a result of that not happening.
Yeah.
And so essentially you'll have less going to reserves.
Yeah.
Coming from Bluewater, and you'll still have a 20% increase in rates.
Right.
Required to support that.
So this is to get us, so Raj, then this means that this 20% increase is to get us on a path to a sustainable reserve buildup, all things being equal.
That is what the 20%, the 20% in 2021, and then the 15% a year in those outer years is essentially going into your reserves to take care of your infrastructure. So you're self-sustainable.
So, and all things being equal as it relates to our historical and expected continued sales of water to Bluewater Park, which we expect they will continue to need to some degree over the next few years.
Yeah, sure.
That's what,
absolutely.
That's what's built into the plan.
From an engineering point of view, I think that's clear. And every water district except Hood Point is facing this 20% increase?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's just, Raj, I can just hear my neighbors already rushing to my front door saying, what's going on here when they get their bills? So I need to be able to answer them.
The big story here is essentially the rate increase is being driven by the low reserve balances to take care of future infrastructure needs.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think it would be nice. I don't know, is there a plan to establish an appropriate reserve balance over time? I mean, is there a budget for what an appropriate reserve balance would be for each of the water districts, or is that still dependent on the completion of the asset management project?
So part of that is dependent on as we get further on in the asset management exercise. Okay. We don't know the condition assessments and what the annual cost of replacing infrastructure will be at this point in time.
Okay, so this is the bit.
What we do know is that the reserve balances are extremely light, and the increases we are proposing are required to start building those balances up.
Yep. Okay, no, I think that I share your concern about the reserve balance and how important it is that it be appropriate going forward. But
Ryan, I have to jump in. We have a Bowen Bay water system meeting at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, I can see that we're running into trouble here. We're going to have to move along quickly. But Raj, I think there is an issue about the assumptions that you are making, and that the assumptions that we in King Edward Bay have, and we are hoping that you share with us, is that we are working towards being entirely independent from Bluewater, and that we will no longer receive those, but it's the assumptions that you build into the financial plan that is important. So the more connections we have, when we have 50 connections, my suspicion is we will not need any to sell water to improve our capital reserve. So that's what we are working towards. So let's not misunderstand this. We're not succumbing to the notion that we're going to be forever connected and yoked to Bluewater. Our intention, our desire, is to be entirely independent financially and operationally. And the other thing is an anomaly which I'll just raise for you before we deal with this motion, is that I have got no idea why we're going 20% in two different areas when the two different areas have completely different capital needs. Now, we don't have the same capital need as Bluewater does. Bluewater's got no capital reserve now. It's just spent 75,000 on the spyglass leak. So
part of the, if I can answer that question before I forget the answer to that, essentially, I mean, your system is newer. So what we've done is tried to balance with what is sustainable, what is a sustainable increase with what's required. I mean, in some of those other systems, the increase required maybe in the 50 or 60,000 or 50 or 60% range. However, you can't impose a 50 or 60% rate increase and have that as a sustainable increase in a given year. So it's going to take time to get the funding levels to where we need them to be. So
when we're on the same page here, I completely understand that. But I'm just putting out a marker that, you know, let's not confuse our assumptions with our financial planning.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. And thanks, Steph, for the reminder that we have to get going. We now have a proposal in front of us. That's this one. So we'll rescind the previous proposal and the seconder to that. But I'll propose this one now, and we'll have to fight our neighbors.
So I'm taking this out then.
And do I have a seconder for this?
I'll second.
Thank you for that, Bruce. And is there any dissent? I can see no dissent, so by assent, we'll accept that. Thank you very much. And we've still got things to go. I'm going to have to ask you to give me the screen back so I can see my minutes. Okay, where are we now with our minutes? Okay, here we go. And correspondence and actions. We're going to have to leave unaddressed, I think, because we're running out of time. You're going to need 5 minutes to prepare, aren't you? So regrettably, I'm going to propose that we, unless anyone has objections, that we do not deal with my email of the in 6.1. The objections to that? Do you think we've dealt with that already? The real issue was the algorithm, which I think Raj tried to address a bit earlier on in another document. We don't really have time to go through that if we must.
We really don't have time. I've got to set up the Zoom meeting for the next. I'm so sorry.
I think we're going to have to note then that we've had no resolution of those following matters, and if you could include that in the minutes.
Okay.
And we better go straight to the next issue, which has to do with a question period that we cannot have anymore unless someone is desperate. Anyone desperate?
Nope.
Good. Then we'll have to go on to information items, and really we'll jump to the next meeting to be determined. And I think we better bring this meeting to a close so that poor Steph can get on with the next meeting.
Well, all of them, and Councillor
Raj and Patrick.
We're all going straight into Bowen Bay. I guess that
well done, you guys.
I realized it would take 2 hours. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Thank you and I'm sorry that we've taken so long. We've got a lot to talk about, and unfortunately,
it's been great. Thank you. Very important. I should have planned it better.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll deal with this in the next minute. So can I suggest that the meeting is adjourned, and we'll determine another date subsequently.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.